You said that some people are not willing to put in the work of developing sort of their own moral system, and they turn to religion to free them from the burden of that thought. But doesn't it make sense on some level to view religion as like an archival system that holds truth? Like if we abandon that, are we not then just in a place where everyone is forced to invent their own morality for themselves throughout their life, and then like a baby born has to try to achieve that again? Like that seems like, from an operative level, just an impossible system to set up that would ever get you anywhere. So I'm just wondering how you would resolve that conflict.
That was Nietzsche's critique, essentially.
Well, I'm not trying to set up the system. I think the system is already set up. So my goal is not to rid the world of religion. That's just a fortunate side effect from my goals. My goal is to have the best understanding of reality that I can, and for other people to do so as well. Now, when I talk about religion, there are things within religious histories, within religious teachings that are passed down, which are true and good and useful. And there's no reason to think that any of those things would go away if we stopped believing in a God, because they are true and good and useful whether there is a God or not. If the thing that we're worried about is, and I've asked people before, and I apologize if anybody is bothered by this, but there are people who are like, oh, if you don't believe in a God, what keeps you from running around raping and killing people? And I was like, so if you became convinced today that your belief in God was unfounded and you were forced by reason to give it up, would you run around and start doing that? And there are people who will say yes, and I hopefully, optimistically don't believe them, but we know that there are people who do that. But the truth about what is good and useful is true whether a particular religion survives or not. And we don't lose that because children aren't born with an understanding of morality. They learn that. They are educated by their parents. They are taught. They explore the world. Everybody does, in fact, go through the effort of creating and understanding their own morality. It's just that we adopt things from figures around us who show evidence that they are smarter and understand this better as a shorthand. We ride on the shoulders of giants. The curious question is, and I ask this for people ostensibly who are Christian, who believe in both a God and a devil, is how did you decide that God was the good one and the devil was the evil one? Because the model is that, well, God wrote his moral code on your heart, and that's how you tell. But if that's the case, then whether or not, if the devil had written his moral code on your heart, you would be saying he was the good one. The truth is, you are using your internal, personal, subjective assessments to determine that God is the good one, or this religion is the right one, or the First Baptist Church got it right, or the Second Baptist Church got it right, or this is the preacher we should hire. This is what we do. And I don't see much value in worrying about, oh, is it all going to go away, when it's clear it doesn't, because secular individuals are no more immoral or criminal-minded than anybody else. In fact, there may be some cases to show that we're less.
But in this society, they are no more criminally minded. Like, we have a religious foundation, right? Like, I wouldn't go around like raping and pillaging if I abandoned God, but there were societies that did when they didn't have that structure. So how do you resolve that?
I'm not saying that religious authorities haven't been useful. It's just that what I hear from some people is that we should keep this because of that particular usefulness, because they fear what will happen otherwise, because what they've seen in the past. And I don't buy that, because that boils down to saying, I may not really need religion, but you people do. And that is far too arrogant for me to ever adopt as a position.
Okay, so I don't want to take up too much time, but did you want to speak to that?
I have a quick comment on riding around on the shoulders of giants, which was the central theme in Matt's answer. We ride around on the shoulder of giants, and the meta-giant is God. That's a very good way of thinking about it.
Except that I can identify
it. We can think about that as, I don't care about the metaphysical implications of that. I don't have to care about that at the moment. But if you look at the evolution of the idea of God, for example, and I think this is particularly true with the evolution of the idea of Christ, is that we do ride around on the shoulders of giants, and the figure of Christ, psychologically speaking, is the giant among giants. It's a meta-giant, and it's a ritual model for emulation. And the ritual model is something like, pick up your damn suffering and bear it nobly, which is a metaphysical statement in some sense that lies at the bottom of the ethic even that Matt is presenting. And so it is deeply embedded in a religious substructure. And that's the metaphorical substructure that I was talking about that necessarily underlies these self-evident axiomatic rules, which are not by any means, as you point out, self-evident in the least. There's plenty of cultures that train their young men to be absolutely barbaric monsters, right? Warriors, killers, rapists, right? Bloodthirsty right to the core. Perfectly viable mode of being, arguably speaking, from the perspective of generating a set of axiomatic rules. Why is it not better to have 10,000 women than one? There's an evolutionary question for you. Well, reasonable people wouldn't do that. Oh yeah, right. Reasonable people. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if it's not clear, I can point to the giants. I can't point to the mega giant. And
it's because it's an abstraction.
Sure, but when you hold Christ up as a particular figure, the only information that I have about Jesus comes from the Bible. And rather than going through all of it again, because there's lots of people with questions, if you go to ironchariots.org, you will find a verse-by-verse deconstruction of the Sermon on the Mount where I point out that Jesus gave some good advice and some crappy advice and some questionable advice, and that's not enough. And there's not a secular humanist organization or country on the planet that has ever produced as a good thing, an intentional good thing, rapists and murderers. So,
well, that's highly debatable. That's highly debatable.
Actually,
one
it's
of the things
absolutely true because there's never been a secular humanist government on the planet.
I don't know. I think the Soviets were pretty secular.
No,
humanist.
Then,
I know
with all due apologies, you do not know the first thing about what secular humanism is. You should read the secular humanist manifestos, because what happened in Russia, in communist countries, was an institution of a religious-like structure centered around an individual and forced atheism, none of which is consistent with humanism. None of it. And we can talk about this later, and I'll be happy to point you to this, because you can say that it was an atheist thing that went awry, but you can't call it secular humanism. It's just not there. There's no humanism in what was done there.